Jesus said in Matthew 24:4, "Take heed that no man deceive you." Is anybody listening to him? You're listening to the best in Christian talk with Ari Golden.
Hi, I'm Ari Golden. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to talk about the Clive and Bundy federal government armed standoff that ended on a few days ago, April the 12th. This is April 15th, Tax Day, 2014. But before we do, we're going to go ahead and go to our verses for the day. That's going to come from the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 11, beginning with the first verse, and it reads, "And it came to pass, after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. And it came to pass in an eventide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her. And she came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanliness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived, and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. These verses leads us right into our topic for today. And let me say from the outset that what happened a few days ago at the Clive and Bundy Ranch, what that whole thing represented was just as important as Dr. Martin Luther King and his marches in the 60s, Rosa Parks, when she protested on the bus. It was every bit as important as those civil rights, major civil rights monuments, as well as others, and even more important. And I'm going to tell you why. We're going to get into it. But David, the beloved, the man who was after God's own heart, the man who slew giants, the man who succeeded Saul as king, beloved of the Lord. But something happened to David between this incident and when David was just a little boy, and that was he became king, and he had become king for some time at this point. And I'm reminded of a saying that goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you're in a position of power like that, it corrupted David. David wasn't a bad man. He was a good man. But his power corrupted him to the point where he took another man's wife that didn't belong to him. And then, like most sins, it spun out of control because she got pregnant. The woman became pregnant, Bathsheba. And so David he concocted a conspiracy involving his men. Well, before that, he tried to get David brought in from battle to have some drinks with him, get him drunk, send him to his wife. That didn't work. His honor code kept him from going into his wife while his men shed their blood on the battlefield for him and David. So what happened was David eventually had Uriah go out into battle, and in his conspiracy had his men pull back. He was ambushed and he was killed to cover up for his crime. But just like any other sin, nothing is hidden from God, and his sin was exposed by the prophet. And he repented, and God forgave him. Now, the point being with that when you become powerful, like the folks that rule over us, you tend, even if you're a good person, to become very corrupted and to take things from people that don't belong to you. But in this case, when we talk about the Clive and Bundy situation, it's not even these folks. It's the folks that are behind him. It's the New World Order we talked about on the previous broadcast. And with the New World Order, as I said, there are 4 Ds. In every case, we have an empire. The New World Order is no different of an empire. It's death, dearth, deceit, and destruction. They're always a part of every, and have been of every empire that has been since Egypt through Roman times, and even today with the New World Order. So this situation is even more serious than the black civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, because these folks that are doing this to us are anti-human. Let me say it again. They're anti-human. They don't like black folks. They don't like white folks. They don't like Indians, American Indians. They don't like anybody. And in order to rule a people, you have to balkanize. You have to divide them. No different than what happened during Jesus' day with the Romans who took over Israel. You had the scribes, Pharisees, all these groups. Well, they had to play politics with them to rule, because it was a lot more of them than it was of the Romans. So you have to divide. You have to divide and conquer. You have to play them off against each other, and you have to play politics and appease them. That's how they were able to keep their rule. And of course, that wasn't always enough, because they were at times even a resistance, and they had to quell those. But that's how you take over people. And see, people think that when we read about the black civil rights movement or the largely genocidal actions that have taken place against American Indians, that all that stuff is past tense. You don't understand the human struggle for decency and to be counted as a human being and not a slave has always been and always will be. There will always will be people that think they're smarter than you and should capture you and should make you their slave. That's why the middle class is disappearing. I mean, you don't have to be really over analytical to understand that. We're heading towards, by design, we're heading towards a world of the haves and the have-nots. The haves are going to be a very small part of it. Go back to the Georgia Guidestones. I'll probably talk about this in a later broadcast. Research it. It's a monument that was set up by the New World Order. Nobody knows who it was. It was a person using anonymity, paid cash, because I saw the YouTube video with the fellows that knew how that went down, paid for the order, gave exactly what they wanted, and you can look and see the Georgia Guidestones today. But in part, it says that the world population should not exceed 500,000 people. Again, as I said, death, dearth, deceit, and destruction. What do you think is going to happen with the rest of the over 6.5 billion? Right, you figure they're ultimately the goal is to kill them. I don't believe God's going to let that happen, because God's in control. Yeah, things will eventually spin out of control. There will be a great tribulation. There will be an Armageddon. Yes, but if the devil were to have his way, not only would the 6.5 billion be killed, but he would kill those that are part of the elite that figure that they're in control of this thing, because they're not even in control of it. This is what we're up against. This is what we've always been up against. But unfortunately, many of my fellow black compatriots will always point to the black and the white struggle. You don't understand. The same folks in the New World Order that are perpetrating what they're doing to Clive and Bundy, and it looks like they're protective of so-called minorities who, in fact, are actually the majority today, blacks, Hispanics, or blacks, Latino, other groups, the illegals that are here. They're just switching sides, because they're the same group that played against us and took our rights away and abused us largely during the slavery and up through the Jim Crow laws. It's the same folks. It's the same game, but you have to divide the people. And it's very important that people understand that you have to get the understanding and have discernment for what is happening. You can't understand what has been hundreds, if not thousands of years in the making, this conspiracy or these conspiracies, and try to understand events through a 30-second video clip or from a scripted news anchor who has embedded CIA agents within their news bureau or through their editor. All right? It's called the Smith-Mundt Act. That was a law that was designed to help protect, to protect Americans from propaganda from their own government. They were doing that anyway, but Obama did away with that law in 2012. So legally, Americans can be propagandized by their own government. They would do it anyway, but now it's legal. You see the game? Fox News. I don't care if you get your news from Fox, if you get your news from CBS, MSNBC. These folks are all lying to you. They're not telling you the truth. They're there to keep the left and the right margins of the same page. And yes, some of the so-called liberals and some of the so-called conservatives, neither which are true, hit on some elements of truth, but that's why I'm calling the margins, because they're only set to a certain point. Anything outside of that, you're wacky, you're conspiracy nut, you wear aluminum tinfoil hats and all of this stuff. They're there to keep the margins, to keep the talking points within certain areas, and won't let it go outside and spin out of control, because that threatens the New World Order. So understand it. This is a very satanic system we're up against. Just to recap what happened at the ranch, I watched some of it on Ustream before the government cut it. This whole situation is so embodied tyranny. I can't even describe it. Before I get into what happened on Saturday, when there was just a few protesters, before it raised too much of a red flag media-wise, there was a few protesters out there, and the protesters that were there became upset and pushed back, and they said, why do you have snipers pointing guns at us? This is a fact. They had snipers perched on hills aiming guns at protesters, and nothing happened. As a matter of fact, it's passé now when you consider that the armed federal government on down through our state and local governments, the cops point guns at us all the time. And before, it would have caused an outrage, but anymore we've become so conditioned, so subservient that we just go along with it. We don't even protest it. Now, I am a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King. I believe in nonviolence. And thank God that what happened on Saturday ended up in a very nonviolent conclusion, although it's not over yet. But what happened was the media and the leaks about what was really going on had become so overwhelming that the federal government decided to back off. And one of the things that happened was all of the mainstream media started to show up, and that was because they heard all of the armed militias were going. Of course, they wanted to demonize them. And you had the story about Harry Reid and his son had a deal with the Chinese communists for his land, to take over that land. And I don't know what happened here. The lights went out. I want to continue with the broadcast. But that story came out that this was actually an Agenda 21 land grab by the Chinese communists. And it didn't just start this past weekend on the 12th, April 12th, 2014. But this had been in the works for years. And for years, they were trying to put Clive and Bundy out of business. For years, they were trying to regulate him out of his land by telling him you've got to reduce your herd by 90%, I believe, something like that. And during the critical calving season, you couldn't have your cattle in that area. Of course, basically dealing him a death blow to his business, to his way of life, by feeing him to death, trying to impose these fees on him, which he had property rights since before there was a BLM, when his cattle were the first in that area to develop it by grazing it through water and forage rights, thereby producing a benefit to the state and the federal government by keeping at bay a lot of the brush fires and things like that. So I digress. Let me go back to what this is really all about. So this story is extremely important. Is as important as any civil rights movement that has taken place in our country, because we are as I said, the middle class is disappearing. We're all being put on the plantation, whether you're black, white, whatever. Big pharma. More and more of us being put on big pharmaceutical on the big pharma medication plantation, and some cases there are forced vaccinations that are given to our kids in the schools, and stuff is being put in our foods. There is an open agenda of social engineering that's been going on for some time, and it's all being ratcheted up. And we need to push back. We're not going to get rid of the New World Order. I hate to tell anybody, it's the truth. There will be tyranny. There will be a rapture. There will be a great tribulation. There will be an Armageddon. We want to push back on it. We want to do like Nineveh was able to get done, a reprieve, though, at least. So at least we can push it back a little bit. We want to reach as many people as we can. We want to awaken as many people as possible. So, and at the face of this whole New World Order is a very tyrannical federal government that is using what I consider to be like a ratchet strap type of effect, or a zip tie, where they get a noose around us, and one notch at a time they tighten, and they tighten, and they tighten, and each notch doesn't release. Each knot keeps you gripped in. And that's what this is all about. And the light just came back on again. So we need to understand just how important this is. It's very important that you research. It's very important that you study. It's very important that you read. It's very important that you go off the mainstream media and find out for yourself what's really going on. In conclusion, before I give you our recommended reading for today, it's very important that you understand that ignorance generates exploitation. Exploitation generates contempt. When you have people who are ignorant, they become easily exploitable. And with that exploitation, they generally get people to hate the people that they are controlling to hate against. So, for an example, in this case, you have the ranchers and a way of life that most of us don't know about, and that's all because, again, we've been engineered. We've left the rural areas. We're becoming more and more urbanized. Our cities are growing. That's by design. So that way of life now, we're all being exploited to be biased against them, and many of us probably even don't even care for these people. So they're just a bunch of cattle rustlers. Who cares about them? See how this works? It's mind control. They're using it, and they're very effective. All right. I have a book. I've had it for a couple of years. It's called Government Bullies. I don't have it with me right now. That's our recommended read for today. It's by Rand Paul. It's about the power of the government agencies like the BLM, it's predominantly the EPA, and how they, by fiat rule, by decree outside of law, to take people's land, tie people up in court to take their property, and it happens all over the country. You can go on YouTube and probably find some of it. All right, our quote for the day as I conclude is going to come from Lavrentiy Beria, head of Stalin's secret police, and the saying goes, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime." In conclusion, a Mormon cattle rancher today, a Holy Ghost-filled, fire-baptized Christian that just wants to win souls and live for God tomorrow. All right? Thank you so much for being with us. Join us again for our next broadcast.
You've been listening to WYU 93.4, riding the last wave of U.S. freedom and Christian talk.